Okay, it's officially 5 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the City Commission work session for budget. Shall we all rise and pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a moment of silence. Okay.
Commissioner Watt? Present. Commissioner King?
Here.
Commissioner Bigelow?
Present.
Vice Mayor Commissioner Wilson?
Present.
Mayor Commissioner Vaughn?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the review of the 5-year capital improvement plan for the fiscal year 2027 to 2031 and fiscal year 2026 to 2027 proposed budget. Ron, Mayor?
Yes, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Yep, and then I'll turn it over. So, thank you, Mayor. So we are going to go through the document in its entirety, and it's going to touch on the capital improvement plan as well as the proposed budget. And we're going to start it off and then turn it over to our Administrative Director, Robin Gomez. As you know, Robin is serving as Administrative Director, also de facto Finance and Budget Director as well, and has led the conversations with our Finance and Budget Advisory Board. We have a member here from that, so thank you for being here. It's been a great couple of meetings with the Finance and Budget Advisory Board. We had a really great discussion at the last meeting. A lot of that is incorporated into this as kind of a first go about with this budget. And then we will have follow-up meetings with the Finance and Budget Advisory Board as well, based off the conversation today. One of the things that, and you may have heard me say this, but when you look at a budget, the budget tells the story of what does the community care about, right? Where are you putting your money? Where are you putting your resources? And what you're putting those towards is ideally what you as an organization, as a body, an elected body, but we as an organization are telling the community what our focus and our priorities are. So back in April, we convened with SGR to come up with a strategic plan. The focus of this year's budget, and we're going to get into the numbers and we're going to talk about revenue, but when we talk about things that we wanted, or we're adding to the budget, things that we want to accomplish, that all comes from our meeting with SGR and the formulation of our strategic plan. So the strategic plan gave us kind of the roadmap. The budget is then delving into that roadmap and showing where are we going to put those resources to achieving the goals in the strategic plan. And then the next fiscal year is about carrying those out and getting closer and closer to achieving what our goal is as an organization. The 5 items that we marked as our priorities of the strategic plan were attend to hurricane needs, create a master plan, enforce city ordinances, increase residential population, and protect home rule. And so what you'll see is that we've marked these as kind of a coded key code of items that we're going to be looking at achieving in this year's budget that go towards that. But I'm going to run through the highlights, and then we're going to turn it over to Rob, and we're going to go through how we got there, and then we'll certainly answer the questions that all of you may have. Per the Pinellas County Property Appraiser, the city's total tax roll assessed value of all real and personal property increased by 5.26%, from $2 billion, a little over $2 billion, to almost $2.25 billion. The increase will generate an approximate 201 in additional property tax revenue in fiscal year 2027. The proposed fiscal year 2027 millage rate is going to be 1.73. Same millage rate for the 4th consecutive year. So we're not suggesting, and this is something we talked with the Finance and Budget Advisory Board about increasing the millage rate. We're holding, our proposal is to hold the millage rate. 1.73 millage rate will yield an estimated $8 million in property tax revenue. The city budgets at 97% collection rate. That will generate, that's actually, 3.775 in actual revenue. The proposed fee tax adjustments to begin effective 10/1/25. We're looking at increasing, and this is actually looking at increasing from last increases in 2015. Budget tax receipts, a 5% increase, estimated total revenue 2.25, 2,250, and then the vacation rental registration application fee, we're looking at increasing that from 300 to 433% per rental unit, with an estimated additional revenue of 110,000. Creation of the parking fund. Separately account for all parking revenues, expenses, and transfers associated with paid parking program that as of May 18, 2026, expanded to include 204 paid spaces at the 18th Street Avenue and speech access in addition to the existing 76 spaces of Pinellas County parking lot between 17th and 18th Avenues. So FY 2027 estimated parking revenue right now is $1.5 million, with an estimated $1.45 in expenses. Approximately $750,000 of those expenses will be transferred to the city's capital improvement fund for a variety of stormwater flood control infrastructure improvement projects. When we implemented the paid parking program, we talked about how we didn't have a stormwater assessment fee. The proposal will continue not to have that stormwater assessment fee levied against properties here in Indian Rocks Beach, but rather use the parking revenue and put that towards stormwater projects. And we can outline kind of what the plan is for that. We did have a stormwater master plan that was completed about 4 years ago, and it's a 20-year plan. And we're a zero debt city. We haven't issued debt. There hasn't been a conversation about issuing debt. But here's a resource. Here's a revenue source that now can go towards ticking off those stormwater projects and alleviating ponding water on our streets and addressing our outfalls. And so that is where this staff is proposing that parking revenue go towards and addressing stormwater needs, which I think is essential, and I think you would agree is essential for this community. We are looking at a 4% or 5% cost of living salary wage for all of our city staff. A 4% increase totals $81,000 in additional salaries. A 5% increase totals $92,000, almost $93,000 in additional salaries. Our greatest asset in this organization is our staff. And we want to remain as competitive as possible in the market. I do think that at some point in the next 12 months, it is going to behoove us to go out and do a market rate study. But for the time being, I think that this is an adequate adjustment for our staff to address cost of living expenses in this country and for our staff. And I think that this is an attempt also to just recognize our staff, the hard work of our staff. We're a small staff, we do a lot. But I think that this puts us in a competitive area, and then do a study in the next 12 months, and then next fiscal year talk about where we are competitively with the other market and making additional adjustments. I will tell you that in meeting with other cities, and this is something we'll, I'm sure, touch on over the course of the next hour with the pending amendment. A lot of cities are struggling with this and how to protect staff, but there are a number of cities that, despite being hit very hard, are committing to some type of cost of living increase for their staff, and we would certainly be counted as one of those cities. So in terms of going back kind of to the strategic plan about how addressing certain items, enforcing our ordinances is paramount in this community. Ever since I got here in October and I've met with all of you, met with our community, it's a community that is desirous of having our ordinances enforced. And I think we do a good job, but I also think that there's a lot to enforce now, not just between short-term rentals, but also parking. And if we move towards looking at enforcing or increasing our enforcement efforts when it comes to solid waste and recycling, on top of everything else, right, fences and permitting and things like that, then my recommendation is that we would add an additional officer. The intent also in adding an additional officer would allow us to get to having 2 officers on the street 7 days a week. So right now, we only have, we are doing code enforcement on weekends, but we only have one officer on Saturday and Sunday. There's a lot that can be done. We can do inspections on Saturday and Sunday. Certainly we can do paid parking on Saturday and Sunday. And I think having 2 code officers covering both Saturday and Sunday would be beneficial for this community. Also enforcing our construction or work after hours and during non-hours. The other item that I have as it relates to staff is moving the librarian to full-time, back to full-time. So the librarian was moved from full-time to part-time after Helene, when the library was effectively destroyed and the library couldn't operate. And so my predecessor made the decision in coordination with the librarian of moving it to a part-time position. But now that the library is open and view the library as an asset, as a major asset to this community. I think if you go there any day of the week, you'll find young families in there, find kids in there. We're supported by our volunteers. We have a great volunteer system. The volunteers are volunteers. They're dedicated, but they're not always reliable, right? And I think moving the librarian to a full-time and speaking to our current librarian about going back to a full-time position, something that we both fully agree with, and it allows more work to get done in the library, and it allows for that additional support to be there rather than just having a volunteer there on certain days during during all the hours of the library being open. I also think it's also demonstrating what we value and where we're putting our resources and protecting that asset that is our library. So moving that to full-time. Then we've got additional contracted services. These are things, since being here in October, we've tried to do things as quickly as possible and within the budget that we inherited on moving towards software upgrades. I think that all of us can agree, staff included, that we are behind on some of our software capabilities. And I think as we, certainly as we are a small staff, it's that old adage of working smarter, not necessarily harder. So how can we work smarter? How can we utilize technology within our means to help for us to do our jobs and to do what the jobs that are certainly important to this community. Citizens Serve software, that is, again, we entered into a contract this past fiscal year. It'll carry over to the next fiscal year. Robin will be doing a demonstration during the 6 o'clock commission meeting on Citizen Serve and getting that up and running, but carrying that through into the next fiscal year. So that $14,400 does that. Cyberella cybersecurity software, this is something that we've worked on internally about bringing in a software cybersecurity provider to help achieve our cybersecurity aims and to make sure that we're protected as an organization against malware and bad actors. I know that some of you have been spammed, I've been spammed, we've all been spammed, and so getting to having somebody that monitors that and adds that protection is something that's critical and is actually state mandated. Forerunner software, that is going to be a budgeted carryover into the fiscal year. We demonstrated that with our Hurricane Task Force. We're going to be demonstrating that further at the August 18th commission meeting, where we'll have Civil Serve in attendance for our neighbors to see how that works. As it pertains to floodplain management, that is actually active online right now on our website, and so neighbors can get on there and can gather floodplain management information as it pertains to their property. Catalyst Communications, they're also on the agenda tonight. Assuming that gets approved, that'll be budgeted the remainder of this fiscal year, but then that $60,000 will carry into the next fiscal year at $5,000 a month for 12 months. That goes towards the aim, our communications, our public relations strategy that we've talked about at our strategic planning session. They'll be here tonight presenting on how they operate and the things that they do and their clients and how they serve their clients. And then land development regulations. That's something that obviously came up through our strategic planning session, bringing in a contractor to review our land development code, updating our land development regulation code, and that'll be a process many months process, but we've already started gathering kind of what that amount will be and making sure that we budget accordingly for that. The goal is to have that up and running and contract ready to go October 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, so we can get going with that, activate our planning and zoning commission, bring them in, and start working with our contractor on updating our land development regulation code. And then Just FOIA. This is something that helps us manage our public records request software. I've only worked in a city that has Just FOIA. I know that some of our staff that worked in other cities work with city secretaries that utilize Just FOIA. We don't have that. We get inundated with public records requests, and this is software that helps manage it all. It helps it go to the right individuals in our organization and to gather that information. And I think it certainly will enhance and augment the work that the city clerk does and help her in her duties. We are the law enforcement contract with Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. We have a great relationship with Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. We were just even talking, we were talking about the night and day difference that the Sheriff's Office has been in serving this community as compared to when we had our own police force in-house. They have costs. They have, just as everything is going up, the cost of everything is going up, so is their service. 6% higher. That's what the contract with them will show in fiscal year, the next fiscal year is the increase, but we can certainly absorb that, and rightfully so. So those are just some of the highlights, the level, big picture things. Certainly we'll look forward to having a conversation with all of you about these items. I'm going to turn it over to Rob and kind of go through the nuts and bolts of all this and how we arrived at some of this stuff. And again, these are things that we also talked with the Finance and Budget Advisory Board, and then we'll also go back and talk with them further after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Mayor and Commission. And please, at any time as we go through, if you have questions, please just stop me. I'd be happy to go over anything. But we're going to go over the proposed millage rates with the property valuations, property tax rate, a little bit of the history. Then we'll go into our main funds, the general fund, solid waste, and our soon-to-be new parking fund. And lastly, look at our personnel, our capital, and then just to provide you the overview of what our reserves and our operating bank account.
Robin, can I ask just an umbrella question before we start, rather than wait till the section? So for the property tax evaluations and the resulting revenue source for us, that does not assume that the City Borough Homes from Excessive Taxes gets ratified, correct?
Well,
Does
not for next fiscal year,
Not for
because if adopted in November, then it goes into effect January 1 of 2027.
Right.
Budgets have already been approved, the tax rolls have already been released, and cities are proposing their budgets based on the data before you. So.
And then, thank you, the second question is relative to the parking. Our projected revenue does not assume any expansion to the current paid parking?
Correct.
Thanks.
Good question. Yeah, I should say, Ryan could fill in, but once we finish the 6-month pilot program, we'll bring that back to you, the results, the data, kind of what we've observed, and then what recommendations we may have. So we haven't quite, obviously, finished the 6 months. We're kind of still getting input. Believe it or not, parking seems fairly simple, but it is quite dynamic because as you get different, visitors in the different scenarios. As we go through the year, things change, and take into account even time change. If the time change happens in November, which I think it will, but I read recently that there may be discussions to not, then that kind of plays into it. And then certainly, as the city is changing a little bit in terms of into residential areas, things that, again, we'll bring back to you in a few months.
Thank you.
And again, I want to note that approximately $750,000 of those expenses are going to be transferred to the city's capital improvement fund for a variety of stormwater and flood control infrastructure as well.
Yes, yeah, and keep in mind, these are really rough estimates. It's a little bit challenging, and I'll say, for example, we're in day 58 of our paid parking and the additional 180 some spaces, and the revenue is significantly higher than we had projected. and a lot of it is attributed to the weather. And so next year, for these same nearly 60 days, the weather could be totally the opposite, and we could be half of what the revenue might be. So it's a volatile service, and so we don't have really much data. I'm kind of using what some other cities have collected, but kind of being rather fiscally responsible, maybe too responsible, but we'll come back, and as we progress, we can certainly update. Keep in mind, a budget is yes, you're required by law to adopt one, and it has to be a balanced budget, meaning your expenditures cannot exceed your revenue, and that's what we're proposing. However, it is a plan of what you're going to do, and that can change and it can be amended as we go through the year. I do foresee bringing you back probably around December, an amendment to the parking fund, maybe not December or March, definitely by March, based on 6 months of activity in the next fiscal year. So the proposed millage rates, there's the significant worksheet. I've shown this before in prior meetings. Goes all the way back to 1992, showing the city's millage rate, the taxable assessed values, again, the property appraiser sets, and then the assessed value of the increases from one year to the next, taxes levied, and then the actual receipts of the city's collection. And this just shows all the way for next fiscal year, again, what Ryan mentioned. We're expecting on a little over $2.2 billion in property valuation, which again is a 5.26% increase, that our revenue, what we are expected to collect would be just under $3.8 million, a little over $200,000 from the current year. The next item on the agenda will be for a review of setting the millage rate not to exceed, and we'll go over that as well as what's called the rollback millage rate, which is the millage rate that you could levy that would generate the same amount of revenue for next year as in the current year, taking into account the increase in the property valuations or an increase in the tax roll. I further go in just to show you what the valuations, the estimates were that we received at the end of May of this year, and again showing that we're at 5.26%. Some of the other cities, including some of our neighbors, are included, really just for you to kind of gauge what's happening. But not a gigantic difference from a low of just under 1% to a max of nearly 7%. And again, this list of where Indian Rocks Beach stands in terms of millage rate compared to 16 other cities here in the county. And just in case you're wondering, the city with the highest millage rate in my nearly 27 years in Pinellas County historically was always St. Petersburg, followed by Clearwater, and they're not listed on here because they're higher, but the city with the highest millage rate is actually the town of Bel Air, which is but I know they're involved in quite a bit of capital and other projects. Going to item 3, so now we get into our funds, the general fund, and this just shows the actuals for the last 3 years, including the current year through June 30th, so about 9 months. We've had some, not significant increases, but clearly there have been increases in property taxes, but as a percentage of the total revenue, clearly property taxes are still the largest portion, and we're from the current year 62% to next year approximately 63% of all the revenue. But no real significant changes. Our fines are we're budgeting a little bit less because the majority of fines, 2 reasons. One, the parking citations or tickets that are normally in this item are going to be now in the parking fund. They will not be in the general fund. And through the work that's been occurring and using CitizenServe soon for the vacation rental registration, we're looking that compliance will increase and therefore fewer people will have to come before the magistrate. I think that's kind of the software will be able to allow staff, for example, to issue renewal notices will be automatic, and will continue to inform folks of the requirements with the ordinances, so looking to increase the compliance. And then in terms of Also, the miscellaneous revenue, there's an anomaly in the current year because about more than half of that is from insurance proceeds from the storms that we received earlier this fiscal year and then last month. That comprises nearly $650,000 of that amount. And also that amount lists, for the current year, lists parking revenue. We haven't separately recorded it in a parking fund yet, so that's why you see that much higher. So the budget for next year is a little much less than what we've collected this year or in prior years. Again, back in 2025 due to the storms, to Helene and Milton. So just to go over some of those changes on the expense side, really kind of Ryan provided some of the highlights. Our expenses are looking to increase just a little bit more than the revenue, and again, adding the position and a half by turning the librarian into a full-time, and then looking at the contracts and agreements that Mr. Henderson stated. So just to explain the changes. And then the rest of this, these pages going forward, go through each department, what the expenditures for those departments are. And no significant, we kind of went over what those changes are, but really the larger changes are, in addition to the additional personnel, are wage increases for all employees, either 4 or 5%. And there's also the next kind of largest category would be in health, and the insurance for employees, health, dental, vision, and life. That's about a little over a 5% increase in the rates that the city receive. We do participate in a pool that is managed through public risk management. And we've had some very good, some success in utilizing and kind of containing the rates. So no real significant changes. We do list, as I think I've mentioned before, that we do list the positions for each department and what the salaries are, which a bill that I believe the governor did sign the bill that now requires that cities must list those and have those available for the public to search. Our budget also has to be simple to search. I'm going to make this even more simple by kind of breaking it down and having some just brief bullet points as to what somebody may want to look at our budget. How much do you spend for a variety of different categories? Those will be on here. There are some, obviously larger cities are in the process of looking for some relatively reasonably priced software that would allow to do that. I think our budget is fairly small that we do not have a need to do that. That's something that we can do just internally by making it easy for people to, whatever questions they may have, there'll be a list and there'll be some links just to go directly to that question. Wanted to find out, for example, what professional services are paid out of the finance department. We'll have that list. So unless you have any specific questions related to all the departments are listed here, I did notice one error in Public Works. In one of the line items, it should be 40,000, not 4,000, but that doesn't make a gigantic issue for the entire budget, but we will make sure that gets corrected. You see some in Public Works where, and also in Code Enforcement, there's a percentage. We do split the salaries between the general fund and solid waste, and then the soon-to-be parking fund, where we're allocating some of the time spent to the parking fund. So that's why you don't see a significant increase, for example, in Code Enforcement, because we are allocating some of that. There's actually a decrease in, for example, the personnel budget in Code Enforcement because we're allocating some of those salaries to the parking fund. The new position we're allocating completely to the parking fund, the new code officer. So just to give you a couple more highlights on that. As we move to solid waste, and that's our solid waste fund. It's an enterprise fund, a utility fund, meaning it's revenues collected for the provision of the solid waste and recycling collections cover the expenses related with those operations. And we're looking again, a significant change on the revenue side and not a significant change on the expenditure side also. What we do have what we don't precisely know is regarding our recycling contract. We are issuing an RFP, so that we're hoping the rate comes down, but we're not sure the rate could go up as well. Also, we are in the year 3 or 4, Dean, of the tipping fee increase.
Right, this is the fourth year.
And that's an 8% increase. So the solid waste that we collect, both residential and commercial, that we take to the Pinellas County waste to energy plant, those fees are increasing by 8%, and they have been for the last 3 years, and they have one more year of that increase after, all the way until fiscal 2028. So we have managed that component of those increases to the solid waste fund. Again, no change in personnel in total in solid waste. And you can see, again, the schedule of expenditures where we do allocate, again, a portion of like the public works director, the administrative assistant, and the one of the code solid waste officers as well. And moving then the newest fund, which I've stated little, still just some rough estimates as to what it might look like. We're looking at revenue of approximately 1.575. To be perfectly, I'm just going to state it. It will likely be higher. That's kind of the reality. Looking again at what our collections have been, but taking into account we're going to go into a slow season. School begins August 11th here, or public school. Yes, there's still some families vacationing from up north because school begins after Labor Day or right around Labor Day. But yeah, then into September it gets a little bit slower. Then into October even a little bit slower. Then it starts to pick up. I think all of you we're all familiar with the seasonal component of living out here and having visitors come out. And then again, if there's the time change. When sunset is at 5:30, that means people are typically not paying to park until 8 or 9 p.m. Some do, but not nearly as many as when sunset's a little later. Of course, if you go out today at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, it's about 110 degrees out. So you just take that throughout the year and try to determine what that might be. We are writing, another component to the paid parking is we've been extremely, just again, surprised by the level of compliance. The amount of times that I have been out, which have been dozens of times, as well as our staff, we're just not writing, they're not writing, I don't write tickets yet. I think they want me to write some tickets, but I don't have that certification. But the amount of times that we find people have paid has been close to 90% or even higher, which a typical rate is about 70 to 75%. I have a few theories why. I think there's enough signage when you pull in. There's one way in and one way out of the 18 street ends. And there's one way in and one way out of the county park. You're going to see the signs that say paid parking. And if you don't see the green signs that Park Mobile provided to us as part of our agreement, then you're going to likely see one of the yard signs that say public paid parking $4.50 an hour or $100 fine. I think if people see that, that tends to be a little, yeah, I probably should go let me pay the $4.50 an hour. It's going to cost me $9, $13.50. I really don't want to pay the $100. So we are, the deputies and our co-staff are out there, but we don't anticipate that to be a gigantic revenue source, but we want the turnover, and people who are paying to park are turning the spaces over. So again, once we finish the 6 month, we'll bring back more information. Difficult to determine the expenditures other than the personnel and the insurance. That subtotal of just under 100,000 is based on actual estimated costs for the year. The operating costs are kind of really, not sure whether we need all of the services that are listed, but since we do, all the other departments kind of have those types of costs, we're allocating some of those costs to the parking. Where we do have the majority of the expenses are related, we do split 40% of the revenue at the county parking lot with the county. So we're accounting for every dollar that comes in and every dollar that goes We could budget and exclude the sales tax and the merchant processing fees, but really those are expenses because we are receiving from Park Mobile every dollar that whether somebody pays for 1 hour or 10 hours, we are receiving, Park Mobile is collecting and then providing that revenue, gross revenue to us. They are, the only item that is being subtracted that is not in our budget is the 35 cents per transaction fee. So that's why you don't see that, but all the others are, again, the main one, the county parks revenue share, sales tax, which we are required to pay, and the merchant processing fees. I did include an administrative fee, which is, that's a fee it is typical or normal for cities to the general fund to charge your enterprise or business-like and even your utility funds a fee to cover the costs that are being utilized in the general fund, which mainly personnel. But it really, or in some cities call it a payment in lieu of taxes that go to the general fund. That doesn't have to exist, but I just included it just to show that it's just another funding source to the general fund to cover the costs and it's really, I just used a flat 5% of the gross revenue, which is typically what cities tend to do. And then the capital part, again, as the mayor stated a few moments ago, this can change. We're looking to just kind of conservatively transfer the 750,000. It could be much more than that. Again, it'll depend on what the revenue will be. Does the parking fund really need reserves? Probably not very big because we're not looking to greatly expand the parking operation where we would be in need of a lot more equipment, such as vehicles or other software. We're not looking to build a parking garage as far as I'm aware, or purchase property to convert into parking. So that's where you would have some reserves in the parking fund, but that has not been a discussion to this point. It could be into the future, but that's the reason why. But again, we will adjust this as we go through the year and certainly provide an update every quarter to the commission as we do our financial updates.
Can I ask a question before you move on? So we're adding a third FTE, a third officer, so an additional FTE for code enforcement. I didn't see it in the code enforcement section. Are we just assuming by inference that person, I see it covered in the parking fund and
Yes.
salaries, but we don't show another FTE in the code enforcement side unless I'm just mistaken.
It's in the parking fund.
Right, but it does, it's just the way that the others are structured, where you've got the number of FTEs in that budget item.
I just didn't do, and I'll make sure that it's added similar to the other ones, but
Yeah, I can see the funding is there,
on the next page where I list the per
Yeah.
fund and per department,
Yeah.
you'll see there's one FTE in parking. I just didn't list it up in that
Gotcha. Thank you.
similar to the others.
Got it.
Yeah, but I'll make sure that that's listed.
Okay.
And this next sheet for personnel, again, goes all the way back to fiscal year 11 and showing, as Mr. Henderson said, there was 27 total employees in the city. Again, we outsource quite a few services. When you don't provide police, fire, or water, sewer, utilities, then you can be fairly small. And that's a good thing. And again, the increase in the code position that's in the parking fund with the estimated additional salary and benefits, and again, we stated earlier changing the librarian from part-time to full-time. However, last year, I know for the budget that was adopted last year for the current year for fiscal 26, they left the library as one full-time equivalent, even though it was less than that. So for next year, it's a full-time equivalent. So on to the capital improvement plan fund. I listed everything on this page, even though kind of accounting wise, just so you're aware, under the revenues, there's a little bit of a carry forward fund balance that the city has as part of what the city reserves have been. But the first row, local option sales tax, that's essentially a restricted revenue. That can only be used on certain expenditures such as law enforcement, for equipment, for example, fire, which we don't provide either of those. So we can use it for infrastructure. It can be used for building and new parks, for roads and streets and drainage. So that's just so you're aware of the local option sales tax, the additional 1 cent per penny for Pinellas funding. We're looking at a few grants. We'll look to obviously obtain additional grants, but these are just listing for fiscal 2029 some of the Southwest Florida Water Management District grants that, again, would have some specific uses to stormwater projects. But the third row, the parking, as we mentioned, again, we will have funding available for the stated stormwater, flood control infrastructure projects into the future. And under the expenditures table, I'm giving an overview of some of the projects as well as equipment, ranging again, the majority being in the stormwater and other flood control improvements, enhancements, to maintaining our city parks. For example, Chickasee Park that had all the trees just essentially dying post-flood, we're going to look to replace them and have some sort of urban architect kind of give us a design what that might look like. Maybe have a public charrette for any ideas relating on what the park might look like in terms of our landscape architect rather. So that's included in the park upgrades, and then you can see the equipment looking to replace some of one vehicle next year, which is it's in the general fund under code enforcement, as well as a Packer truck in for our solid waste fleet. And then in the outer 28, 29, 30 years, you can see some of the other equipment mainly related to some heavier equipment, including a street sweeper, which that was a kind of a recommendation from the Finance Budget Committee, is look at whether leasing or outsourcing street sweeping. We'll certainly look at that because street sweepers are expensive. They're very expensive. So something that we could look at. There are some other cities that do outsource it. You tend to be at their scheduling of when you can agree to a contract that stipulates you will sweep X number of streets on these days and times. It's usually good, but you don't have full control of that. So there's positives and drawbacks as to outsourcing versus keeping in-house for street sweeping. And then to nearly the last item on the list are reserves in the city's operating account. But this is just showing as of June 30th, where kind of what the city's bank balance and then the balance in 3 separate investment funds that are public investment funds essentially created for cities and particularly smaller cities to utilize. So we had a fairly good bank balance, a little over 4.2 million. And then the 3 investment funds are a little over 4.1 million. Just to show you where you are, we haven't made any decisions in terms of reinvesting the funds that are in one of those 3 investment firms. Really kind of looking to determine really didn't get an awful lot from the Finance Budget Committee. We can certainly review it in more detail at the next meeting as to whether we should reinvest, whether that be whatever that amount might be, 500,000, 750, $1 million, or what our reserves really should be. Typically, cities our size would not have a reserve this high. It's more than 50% of the general fund budget. It's closer to 80% of the general fund budget, which is good to have. But really, the only requirement that the city has is to maintain a $100,000 emergency reserve fund. So other than that, it's really kind of what policy directive I think the commission would want us to follow. And in terms of investing, we don't have an investment committee, but we can certainly, again, bounce it off the budget finance committee, but make a determination how to proceed going forward. But really just to show that financially we're in an okay state as of June 30th of this current year. Be happy to answer any questions.
So, Robin, I know we had a chance to speak. Can you go back over the VRR?
Yeah, I'm sorry, did go over
that's
it.
been updated?
Right, into great detail. So we included in the budget increasing the vacation rental registration from $300 per unit to $400 per unit. And what that does is it generates, well, I had included also the fines, and so it had generated enough revenue to cover the expenses. Taking out the fines, this spreadsheet that I kind of reworked earlier today just kind of gives an overview of what expenses are, what we're looking to budget, and I apologize, it cut out the FICA and the requirement, but it still shows you the totals. And it gets a little bit bigger. And this was shared with the version that I shared with the Finance and Budget Committee is this version, with the exception that I looked at increasing what the revenue would be if we increased the fee from 300 to 450, which would generate 660,000. And again, that's the $150 inspection fee would remain the same. It's the application fee that we would be looking to increase to either 400, 450, 500, or any other amount that you would suggest. But this is the corresponding revenue. Again, if we go to $450 for the application fee, then the revenue estimated to be 660,000. That's based on 1,100 units. And again, looking at close to maximum compliance that we possibly can get. These are the budgeted expenditures for next year, approximately just under 628,000. What I did not include are calls from the sheriffs. Difficult to determine what that expense might be. If we average 1 or 2 calls a week, I don't imagine that this expense would be greater than probably $5,000 or $6,000 a year. And again, we're already, that's being paid to the sheriff for their regular work, but in terms of what's allocated to the vacation rental, I think Brian did something to add.
No, we get call sheets, and this is something I commend the sheriff's office on. I'm able to get weekly call sheets on where there are calls to, and which properties, and then you can kind of go through and you can kind of try to figure out and extrapolate which one of those are registered in our rental registry program. But it's sporadic, and I agree with Robin. I don't know really how much that would yield and how much that would change this equation.
So, Robin, just to recap, I know when we spoke the other day, the 400 actually doesn't cover the cost of the program.
If we
take the
take-
fines
correct,
out, so
yeah.
we would need to at least do a number different than the 400, right? We want to go higher.
Yeah, just
so that-
just doing the math on it, it would, 450 would more than not cover our total expenses to manage the vacation rental registration program.
I think our goal as a commission would be that the VRRs pay for their own way, not at the burden of our taxpayers. So I think 450 would be more appropriate as well.
I think it needs to be more. I think we need to move some of the sheriff fund over to manage the STRs. If we move it over, kind of spend it, I think we ought to be up around $1,000 per registration. That's where I think we need to be. Cocoa Beach, Florida. They're at first year is $2,500. Second year it's $1,500. So that they can manage their STR issues. So I don't think 400 is enough. I think it needs to be much higher.
Yeah, I think, sorry, just to comment on the Cocoa Beach, I also read that they have a sliding scale, so it's based on a per guest. So if you have a residence that can have 10 nights, then their rate is $220 monthly per guest, and they would pay $2,200 for that VRR registration. If it's got, if it's a 4-person max or a 6-person max, it's $220, just times whatever number of guests that you can fit in. That was an interesting way, because I guess the theory is that the burden is greater for the higher occupancy in terms of administrative.
It's a cost per orange, yeah, it's an interesting thought. So, Robin, would we ask I know you said it's gonna go back to the finance committee, would we ask them to dig into that?
So what I was going to suggest is really take any of the comments you have, and if you want to send them back to the Finance and Budget Advisory Board for further discussion, we can make note of that and include that as part of our agenda. You're not obviously approving the budget tonight. This is first blush, go through, and anything that you want the committee to continue looking at, and then we'll put that too.
So what I'd like to do is ask the commission, if we have any, would it be good that we just send it to you, Ron? I do want to, I'd like to change this. We've got approved a resolution dealing with millage rate. Should we open the floor up
Well,
first?
what I was actually going to suggest is if we can carry that over to the regular meeting and have it voted on after we start the 6 o'clock meeting, just be consistent with our rules of order and operation. But I don't know.
Matt, yes.
I'd ask for a motion that we continue this to the 6 PM agenda. I think in the past, we noticed these as special city council meetings, and this one's noticed as a city, or city commission meeting. This is noticed as a city commission workshop or work session. So I'd ask that we get a motion to continue it to the 6 PM agenda, and then we'll address it at that time.
Okay, I'd like to apologize to the galley. We did have a workshop on our budget meeting. I am going to ask for a motion that we continue this to the regular appointed commission meeting.
I'll make the motion that we move the remainder of our discussion about millage to the regular commission meeting to open at 6 p.m.
Second,
Do you want to roll, or should we ask for an all in favor?
We'll just take a roll to be safe.
Okay.
Commissioner Watt,
yes.
Commissioner King,
Yes.
Commissioner Bigelow,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Yes.
Mayor Vaughn,
Yes.
passes.
Do I have time to ask one more question?
No, please do. Yeah, I don't think we were done.
Sorry.
Yeah.
On the software for the public records request, does that include digitizing our public records?
We're gonna talk about that in our meeting, aren't we?
Well, we can continue budget questions for that, but it just worry about digitizing.
It will be a part of it. They'll help us with that.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that budget included that item, long asked for item.
Thank you. We're adjourned for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Email. Yes, sir.